If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. First things matter. First events in stories are important. They set the tone. They help the reader anticipate what is to come. They shape our expectations. First events make a difference. And this is unapologetically true for the Gospels. While there are similarities between the four Gospels, each author was striving to paint a particular picture of Jesus for their readers. And because first events set the tone, each Gospel writer recounts a different first act for Jesus' ministry. For example, according to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' first public act is an exorcism during worship at the local synagogue. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus kicks off his public ministry as a teacher, delivering a sermon to the crowds from the height of a mountainside. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus almost gets run off a cliff by angry worshipers after reading from Isaiah and announcing his intent to release the captives and bring good news to the poor. First things matter. They set the tone. And so in John's Gospel, the first thing Jesus does is go to a wedding. No healing, no preaching, no teaching, just a big old town party. What a way to start, right? First century Jewish weddings were gala occasions, festive events, grand parties that lasted a week or more. Everyone came out. At a Jewish wedding, people celebrated the bride and groom. They celebrated the couple and their families, certainly, but they also celebrated and gave thanks for their covenant with God. Weddings were heavily steeped in symbolism, pointing to the marriage or covenant between God and God's people. A wedding was a sign, a reminder of the promise that God made with God's people at Mount Sinai, sealed in the giving and receiving of the Ten Commandments, which sort of act like a marriage vow of sorts between God and God's people. The wine at a wedding would be flowing for days, wine being the symbolic cup of gladness and blessing and peace. And so this is how John chooses to begin Jesus' story. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, I find it fascinating that Mary is not formally named. Of course, my hackles get raised a little bit at that. But then I wonder if John was doing this intentionally to establish the relational connection between Jesus and his mom. There was a wedding, and Jesus' mom was there. And almost like an afterthought, John adds, oh, and Jesus and his disciples were there too. But first, mom was there. Now keep in mind that by this point, Mary was no longer the young girl of our nativity stories. She was the matriarch of her family, and very likely by this point, a widow. Now, my apologies to our Catholic siblings in the congregation, but she was also the mother of about a half a dozen sons and daughters, if not more, and very likely a grandmother by this point. Now, when I look at the women that I know who have children in their 20s and 30s, I know when I am with them that I am among sages and warriors. These women know what's up. They pay attention. They see what we don't see. They hear what we don't hear. Years of keeping a home going, caring for the community and family, and raising children, I think it gives you a certain edge. The creases next to their eyes tell the stories of belly-splitting laughter and gut-wrenching grief. There's an awareness in their bones, wisdom and stature. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Oh, and so were Jesus and his disciples. It was a party, after all. First things matter. John continues, when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. I read something recently referring to this moment as the ministry of paying attention. Mary was paying attention. She had likely been the mother of a bride or mother of the groom a couple of times already. She'd likely attended 100 weddings in her lifetime. She knew what to watch for. She was paying attention. Jesus, Mary says, pulling on the arm of his robe and drawing his ear to her lips. Jesus, they have no wine. She knew what this meant for the hosts. She knew the humiliation it would bring to them and their families, the shame. But she also understood the deep symbolism of a wedding. Jesus, they have no wine. This is the symbol of the people's covenant with God. They cannot run out of wine, Jesus. Pay attention. But Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. Jesus was being a little bit lippy with his mama. I've looked through the commentaries, I've read about the social interactions among family members, and in no place is this kind of interaction between a child, even an adult child, and their parent considered respectful. Jesus was likely having a good time with his friends, and his mother pulled him out of the reverie to point out to him something that clearly was not his issue to solve. It's really not that hard to imagine, actually. Jesus, they're out of wine. Woman, that's not our problem. Please indulge me just a moment of creative licensing here, because I imagine that at this rebut, Mary shot her son one of those mom looks, you know the ones that knocks the air out of your lungs and reduces your knees to jello. You know the look that I'm talking about. The one that makes you snap to attention, pull the brakes real fast. So the next line he says, I imagine with a little bit of a stutter, "Mom, my time has not yet come." He was still young. He was enjoying the party. In John's gospel, Jesus is fully aware of his role as the Messiah. So he knows what burden awaits him. And so maybe he didn't feel ready yet. Maybe he just wanted another night or two of freedom before the work started. Maybe he wanted to enjoy the festivities with his disciples and friends. My hour has not yet come. Isn't it interesting that Mary doesn't try to convince her boy? She doesn't argue with him or reason or berate. She sees him, her little boy, her miracle child, the Son of God, and she has known since the beginning. Mary, did you know, croons the now famous Christmas song. Yes, yes, she did. She knew. Mary's ministry since the beginning has been one of paying attention. I wonder if here at the outset of his ministry, Mary knew better than he did, because she didn't try to talk Jesus out of it. She simply turned to the servants and instructed them, do whatever he tells you. And I wonder how Jesus responded to that. I wonder if he heaved a sigh of resignation. I wonder if he smiled at her confidence in him and her faith in God. I wonder if Jesus snapped into a sense of self-awareness and realization, yes, this is the moment. Perhaps my hour has come. Whatever his response to his mother in the moment, Jesus turned to those same servants and said, "Fill those large jugs over there, fill them with water." Now you need to understand that what Jesus pointed to were no ordinary jugs. They weren't the water pitchers, rather, that you get when you go to a restaurant and the waitstaff bring you over some still water for enjoying while you're waiting for your meal. These massive containers held about 30 gallons each, and they had a vital function in Jewish culture and custom. The water from these particular vats were used to wash their faces, their hands, and their feet. This is important. You see, on your own, you were not pure enough to eat a meal, address visitors, enter worship, or return to the sanctuary and love of your family without proper purification. These jars of water played a key role in the life of Jewish people. So Jesus said to the servants, "I want those water jars filled up to the brim, fuller than full, with water," which is a little strange given that it was wine that had run out, not water. Nevertheless, after they had done so, Jesus instructed that some of the contents of one of the jars be drawn out and delivered to the chief steward, the master of ceremonies, for tasting, without indicating to him from where the liquid had come. When the steward tasted it, he was shocked. The best wine he had ever tasted. "Everyone knows you serve the best stuff first and the cheaper stuff later. But you," he said to the bridegroom, "you have brought out the finest reserve of wine at the end." Imagine how shocked the bridegroom was, and the servants who had filled the jugs with water, and the stewards when he was let in on the secret. Perhaps the only one not shocked was Jesus. Oh, and his mom. I can picture a smile on her face, something like smug pride in her boy. John concludes his story with these words: Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. First things matter. And the first thing in Jesus' ministry, according to John, is this sign. Not a miracle, a sign. This word choice is intentional. Unlike miracles, you see, signs themselves are not the thing of value. Signs are valuable only by virtue of the fact that they point to the thing of importance. Let me give you a rather ordinary example. When you are driving and you come across a stop sign, you don't pause to consider the piece of metal, its hardware, the shade of red paint used, the size and typeset of the font. No, you see the sign, you register its intent, its meaning to stop, and then hopefully you do so. In the Gospel of John, it actually works the same way. Turning water into wine wasn't a miracle. In fact, if we reduce this story to Jesus simply having the ability to mess around with chemistry and physics, then we've completely missed the point. Water into wine isn't a miracle, it's a sign. It points to something beyond itself. It points to Jesus. It points to something about who he is when he's among us. So look at the story again. Start with Mary's ministry of paying attention. Running out of wine will mean shame and ruination for the family and even the community. No amount of purification water is going to fix that gossip. She points this out to her son who maybe hadn't noticed. "Woman, why is this our concern?" Followed by a mother's searing look. Mary instructs the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." And here's the thing, if it's just a matter of chemistry and physics, Jesus could have done any number of miracles to manifest wine. He could have made all the guests cups such that they never ran empty. He could have done some kind of loaves and fishes thing, but he didn't. He points to the purification jars. Fill them with water, he says. Water meant to take what is impure and sin-soaked and make it acceptable before God. Water used to symbolically wash the body and cleanse the soul. That water was turned into wine, a symbol of God's grace, God's blessing, and a taste of heaven itself. It's not a miracle. It's a sign of who Jesus is and what he's about. Jesus took what symbolically represented 180 gallons of "you're not good enough." 180 gallons of "you got to get yourself cleaned up before you are accepted." 180 gallons of shame and dishonor, and he transformed that purification water into wine, which is the symbol of God's pleasure, God's promises, God's peace, wholeness, welcome, and loving kindness. 180 gallons of new meaning, new wine that would burst old wineskins. It's not a miracle. It's a sign of who Jesus is and what he's about. 180 gallons of purification water meant to wash off dirt and shame and guilt are transformed into 180 gallons of grace and abundance and joy. Enough grace for a whole village, enough grace for a province, enough grace for the whole world. Listen again to the words of John's Gospel prologue in light of this first sign. From his fullness, John writes, we have all received grace upon grace. The law that was given through Moses, that's true, but grace and truth, that comes through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is only God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made God known. You want to know what grace upon grace tastes like? It tastes like 180 gallons of the best wine the world has to offer, coming to the celebration just as our own resources have run dry and we are on the brink of disaster and ruin. Water into wine is a sign that points to Jesus, that points to a new reality. One no longer marked by shame and guilt, rules and law and death. A new life, one of grace upon grace upon grace, for you, for your community, and for the world. Do you remember how it all started? Do you remember what the first thing was? It was Mary paying attention. And so sometimes I wonder, when I read this story, when I crawl inside of it, I wonder if the greatest gift that we can offer to the world around us is the miracle of just paying attention. The people around us, their circumstances, their lives, the narratives they repeat about themselves and the world, paying attention to the world is a gift. Paying attention to the environment, to policies and systems. Paying attention to who is being left behind, who is left out, whose voices aren't being heard, who is on the edge of society's idea of shame and dishonor. Jesus, they're out of wine. What a prayer. What an act of bearing witness to the pain of the world, bringing it to the one who is the light of the world. Jesus, they're out of wine. What signs would be manifest in our midst if we just paid attention? It's so easy to get self-involved, to not see beyond our own flesh and blood, our own tiny universe with ourselves at the center, whether in good times or in hard times. What would it look like for us to have eyes that see the world, that see the image of God in every person we encounter, and see the seeds of the kingdom planted everywhere we look, pointing like divine signs to the Creator and Redeemer. First things matter. There was a wedding. Jesus' mom was there. Oh, and Jesus and his disciples were there too. The Son of God, the light of the world, the bread of heaven, the cup of salvation. And the party host just ran out of wine, or so they thought. Jesus' first act in John's gospel was a sign pointing to the abundance of grace upon grace that God's kingdom brings. And what triggered this event? What triggered this sign? The one who carried him into the world paying attention. You and I, we are bearers of God too. And so perhaps ours is a ministry of paying attention. To God be all the glory. Amen.